there was a king who thought he could challenge the gods with his power. Babylon rose in his hands, shining like gold. But history whispers, when humans forget their limits, the throne can become a cage. Hello, dear viewers. Today you will meet one of the most magnificent and dramatic rulers in history, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, also known as Bukhtanazar. We will see that he was not only a king, but also an unforgettable figure in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic sources. Get ready, because the story begins with the grandeur of Babylon and the exiles, and it reaches its peak with an incredible legend of turning into an animal. Nebuchadnezzar came to power in Babylon in the 6th century BCE. He quickly became the most powerful ruler of his region. He defeated Egypt with his armies. He brought Syria and the kingdom of Judah under his control. He invaded Jerusalem, destroyed Solomon's temple, and exiled the Jews to Babylon. This event had a tremendous impact in both historical and religious literature. But here's where the real story begins. Nebuchadnezzar's later years were marked by a dramatic event, a test of his pride against God's power, the legend of him turning into an animal. In the book of Daniel, this king is defined by a dream that shatters his illusion of power. Centuries later, modern stories echo the same idea. In The Matrix, we hear the line, "I dreamed a dream within a dream." It's a powerful reflection of the same ancient warning. When illusion collapses, truth begins. According to tradition, Nebuchadnezzar began to see himself as a god, equating the grandeur of Babylon with his own power. One morning he woke up to find himself grazing among the shrubs like an ox. His hands and feet had grown claws. He had lost his human form. For 7 years he lived like an animal, not among people but in nature. Imagine this, the most powerful king in the world eating grass and shrubs like a beast. Jewish sources, especially the book of Daniel, present this as a demonstration of God's power and a warning against the king's arrogance. Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. He helps the king learn a lesson from this dramatic experience. Islamic sources interpret it similarly. It is a trial from God for proud rulers. For 7 years, the king lived believing he was an ox, while Babylon was ruled by his wife, Queen Amytis. Christian interpretations also emphasize the lesson about humility and obedience to God. Some historians suggest this might have been a psychological breakdown or illness. But religious narratives present it as both symbolic and moral. Human power is limited. Arrogance in the face of God's will carries a heavy price. So how did Nebuchadnezzar recover from this period? According to tradition, by God's will, he regained his mind and returned to human form. This experience humbled his pride. It strengthened his devotion to God, and it allowed him to reorganize the administration of his city. Nebuchadnezzar's story doesn't end with turning into an animal. The hanging gardens of Babylon, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the Jewish exile form his historical and legendary legacy. The hanging gardens, built by his wife Amytis to ease her longing, are described as one of the most magnificent gardens in history. The Jewish exile makes Nebuchadnezzar's story even more unforgettable in the Torah and other religious texts. Jewish prophets interpret the exile as both God's justice and a test for the people. Islamic sources also emphasize God's power in response to the king's arrogance. Christian sources reflect similar moral lessons about pride and divine authority. Historians note that some details of these accounts may be legendary, Yet the dramatic power of the events has reached us today. The combination of turning into an animal, Babylon's grandeur, and the exiles creates one of the most impressive and instructive stories in history. The story of Nebuchadnezzar turning into an animal illustrates the limits of human pride against God's will. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic sources tell the story differently, but the shared message is clear. When humans overestimate their power and grow arrogant, divine justice eventually comes. Imagine this. The most powerful ruler in the world lived for 7 years like an ox among shrubs. Afterwards, by God's will, he returned to human form. This serves as a unique lesson in both historical and religious literature. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the destruction of Solomon's temple, the Jewish exile, and Nebuchadnezzar's transformation into an animal. Together, these events form a powerful narrative conveyed by history and religion alike. This story is a striking example of power, pride, and divine justice. When telling Nebuchadnezzar's story today, it's important to consider both historical records and religious narratives. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic sources offer different perspectives, but all emphasize the moral and divine lessons of the events. Nebuchadnezzar's dramatic story still gives us important messages today. Human power is limited. Pride and arrogance can bring down even the strongest ruler. Combined with the grandeur of Babylon, this story becomes an unforgettable blend of historical and religious lessons. Dear viewers, Nebuchadnezzar's story not only recounts historical events but also teaches us about human pride, God's power, and the certainty of justice. The legend of turning into an animal dramatically conveys this message. If you are curious about these kinds of historical and religious stories, you can explore the grandeur of Babylon, the dramatic effects of the exiles, and Nebuchadnezzar's life more closely. Comparing both historical and religious texts greatly helps us understand these events. We've reached the end of our video. If you found Nebuchadnezzar's dramatic life story and the legend of turning into an animal interesting, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video with more surprising stories from history.